What is the best programming language? Is it Python, C, JavaScript, Ruby? No. The best programming language is English. In the world of agentic coding, LMs are English majors, trained on English language. You can evaluate this from two perspectives, the prompt and the evaluation. So here we have two prompts. Prompt A, as we can see, this is a very unstructured prompt, lazy English version. There's a few reasons why prompt B is better. Number one, it's direct. It does some role playing here. It clearly labels what the context is, it clearly labels the tone, and it gives a constraint. But that is not the only part. It's well-structured English. There's separation here. Whereas in this one, it is all in one go. The LM doesn't have an idea of which part corresponds to which. And so as with everything with LMs, all we really can do is look at the average score over a long period of time, and we can see that with structure comes better results on average. And so the raw prompt, which is akin to what we sent with prompt 1, has a mean score in this test they ran of 5.67, whereas the checklist method, which is akin to prompt 2, produced a 750. Right? We could run this test a million times. There may be a time where raw outperforms checklist. But what we can say is from these tests here, on average, the checklist has a better chance of a good score. If you can't explain it simply, you simply don't understand it well enough. There is a definite importance here on the structure itself. Structure is above all the most important. But if you don't have at least a decent level of English, the odds of you running into these mistakes is going to be higher. Now, with this reality of English being the new programming language, there are some interesting opportunities here. This is basically an untapped market, right? Going back to our examples, maybe 10 years from now, we'll come to a realization that LLMs work better with lists, where we list out, hey, 1, do this, 2, do that. Maybe this produces a much better outcome. But one thing has been very apparent: the more clear, the more concise, and the more structured your output, the better. And this is not just on us, right? This is also dependent on the labs, right? You have to realize the labs have a harness that everything pretty much goes through. And what they choose to do with the system prompt and all these various knobs that they get to control post-training can have an impact on what it means to have a good input. When you send a message to Claude, the prompt is only a small part of what context it gets. The ability for Opus to one-shot a video game like this really comes down to just giving it full reign, because the newer models have a higher level of judgment based on a lot of what they've done here in the middle layer. And I believe actually there are risks to this. Well, when there is a third party that is doing all this stuff, right, Anthropic, OpenAI, the hope is that they're putting things into this middle layer that will maximize the general use case, but this won't always be good. Claude system prompts have changed a lot over time. Every line that they've put into this system prompt has a reason. All right, we can just kind of read some of these out here. Claude never curses unless the person asks, or curses a lot themselves, and even then, Claude does so sparingly. All right, let's look back at cursing in one of the earlier models. We can see from an earlier version of Opus, so this is Opus 4, the cursing line is a bit longer. Opus 4 version, which really uses more complex wording, right? Reticent is not a very common word. You're not going to see this thrown around the internet or training data very much. Whereas in the newer version of it, it is a much simpler form, right? This is a very layman English. Everything you're seeing here is impacting the output. And so there's actually benefits to omitting all this stuff, right? Because really this system prompt here is a general use case system prompt, right? There's a reason why apps like Pi exist, where it omits the middleman, and you don't have to worry about something they're doing in the middle layer impacting your result. They went from a very overly complicated English with a lot less structure to now being in a state where the English has been simplified quite a bit, and we see a lot more usage of structure. We see lists and tags, right? So the labs are making use of this reality that, hey, the more structure our system prompt, simpler the English, the better odds it's going to perform well. When I'm talking about better English, I am not referring to more complicated English. When it comes to prompting English, simpler is better. When you realize the data that these models are trained on and how most of it is internet data, think about Stack Overflow as a way of communication. Going back to Opus 4's version of the cursing line, when have you ever seen somebody use the word reticent in any context? It is an extremely rare word, and these types of words are concerned. And part of what I was saying before, if you can't explain something simply, the same goes with English. If you find yourself needing very complicated words to explain something, probably you don't understand it well enough to make it simpler. And so with this new language that we now have, right, this new ultimate programming language of English, There are some challenges, and I want to talk about those. In the days of old programming languages, Python, C++, etc., the challenge we faced before was that it was strict. If you messed up in any of these syntactual areas, guess what? You were getting an error. And it was for a reason, right? It kept things working as intended. Now with English language, the challenge is actually in the opposite area. It's too loose. Right, we're trading strictness for looseness, where before the annoyance was in the actual creation of the code, right? We would spend hours and hours trying to get it right. Now we spend very little time with English language, and each of these have a trade-off, right? The strictness of before made it slow. The looseness of now makes it inconsistent. I'm not going to sit here and say that if I send prompt B 100 times, it's going to come out the same way. LLMs are not a guarantee. Can never be exact. All we can do is attack this layer with every bit of our strategies and hope that it comes out with a better output on average. And so I believe English language is the key to that. And let's also make sure I'm clear here as well. What I'm not saying that English majors will do better than an engineer. If I'm stuck on an island and you ask me a question, if I had to choose between an English major or an English professional versus a CS professional, which would I take? I would take the CS professional every day of the week. But it still matters. If you think about the impacts here, having systems knowledge will get you most of what you need. If you know how to explain and you know the keywords involved in systems development, but there's this extra space here that is hard to capture, right? That last 20, 30%, that is the hard part to get better at. And what I'm arguing here is not that English professionals are better than CS professionals. What I am saying is that the CS professional benefits from learning English. Yes, you can get by as a CS professional without having strong English and structuring, but you're sacrificing upwards of 30%, if not more, of your effectiveness. And you're seeing that with these labs, right? Every change they make, if you look over through this history, you're seeing their English become simpler. You're seeing it become more structured. This stuff still matters. Right, I've always said that, in my opinion, skills are duct tape. I've gotten a lot of pushback on this, but I still stand by it. You'll see these absolutely unbased claims that, hey, if you have issues with any model, just use this skill and it'll fix everything. And that really is part of what this is. You're really just adding to the block. And people have conducted studies on this time and time again. Now, let's be clear, you cannot reliably test skills. If you ran the test 1,000,000 times, I think you can get a good gist of the impacts it's having. But ultimately, you cannot reliably test the impact of a skill. But even so, we have done tests of this before. From this article here on Medium from Lorenz War, he's discovered that, hey, as we add more and more skills onto the pile, it becomes less and less effective. Skills in the middle of context get less attention, right? Every bit of English that you're sending to this LM, and the system prompt is involved in this, but skills are especially sketchy when it comes to this because you're sending that more frequently. And in some cases, you're sending it with every prompt. And so although his tests, these aren't really reliable tests, but one thing we can know that is true and is reliable, the more shit we pack into this LM, the worse. This is the only thing we can really intuitively understand. Now, that's not to say that every line that we add extra is bad. You look at these system prompts, just because Opus 5 system prompt is a freaking beast compared to the older ones, does not necessarily mean that it's worse. But when it comes to skills, you have to be very careful and realize that you're adding more shit. And so that shit that you're adding better be good. Simpler is better. But he does talk about skills, right? He says, think of skills as lightweight guides to let Claude find information when needed. Avoid making them over-constrained, except in highly important areas. Right, this is in line with my definition of duct tape. Duct tape is a great thing. I use it more often than I should. But in reality, if everything was perfect, I wouldn't need a duct tape. But at the same time, I'm not going to promote somebody to use duct tape to keep their pipes in order. Right, ideally, you hire somebody to seal it up properly. But unfortunately, with LMs, we don't get full power there. The odds of prompt B being successful is higher. This is all I can tell you confidently. When we give this lazy English, on the surface, it might seem to you like, hey, this is just giving the LM freedom, but it's not. Freedom is with constraint. You have to have some form of structure with what you're sending. This is what allows the LM to run with its freedom. Whereas here, it's like confused. It doesn't know how to interpret what's happening. Here, it can block these out, right? It can say, okay, this specific portion of the text is for context. This specific portion of the text is for tone. And so it can block out these individual elements and ensure that it can give full effort to each of these individual parts. Having a good foundation of English, having a good foundation of structure, which really comes from being good at English, is how you succeed. Try simplifying. This is the new keyword for everything that you're doing. And how do you simplify? Learn as much as you can about English. Grammar, punctuation, different words. All of that will lead into better structured inputs, which will ultimately lead to higher probability outputs.